I'm Atul Sehgal. I'm a registered tutor at UrbanPro.com. I've been associated with UrbanPro for more than a year and a year now. So I have more than 12 years of tutoring experience. I've been an IT trainer, spoken English trainer, and IELTS coach. So I believe in experiential learning. So all the modules which I've created, which I've put together, where these comes from the deep research and experience I ever had working in a multinational company and global teams. My colleagues and managers have been from offshore locations, so that has given me a real good indication of what all are needed, what skills are needed to be successful in professional environment. So accordingly, my course is a combination of some basics, some learning skills, some spoken skills, and as well as a lot of spoken English practice. I believe in experiential learning and getting my student accustomed and uh, practicing the spoken English skills so that they come out at the best of version of themselves. Thank you.
Essentially, we are going to cover introduction about what contractions are, common contractions. We'll be learning somewhat about its pronunciation, also negative contractions, and of course, in which scenarios they are to be used and when they should not be. So contractions form integral part of spoken English, especially for native speakers. You see, English speakers, or specifically native speakers, follow an approach of least effort. Means they should be able to speak things out or words out with least resistance and most effectiveness. So native speakers talk a lot, use contractions a lot. It helps in their fluency. See, these contractions are made up of combination of verbs, auxiliary verbs, or modals in combination with pronouns or nouns. So essentially, a verb that is an auxiliary verb or a modal will be reduced and it will be combined with some pronoun like she, he, and or a noun, maybe someone's name, to come up with a new word technically with different spellings and different pronunciation. And typically, a contraction will have an apostrophe indicating that it is a contraction and there are a few words which have been hidden. So let's take an example. Now, in my scenario over here, if I say she would visit her grandparents every summer. Now, it's a simple sentence saying she would. Now, most speakers of native English, they will not say would as such. The only thing which remains out of the would is the sound. And it is combined and linked with she to make up a contraction called she'd, right? So it will be she'd visit grandparents every summer. So we are going to look at these contractions, its usages as such. This was one of the examples of the contraction. Let's look at one more. You are the most talented person I have met. See? Now, this sentence has two candidates for contraction. We have you are and I have. See, if I combine these two, I'll have this sentence change into you are the most talented person I've ever met. You see that? You are becomes you and I have becomes I. And you can notice this specific apostrophe in these two words. Now, You are is a single word now. After contraction, it's your, and it's pronounced differently. And obviously, you can see it's written with an apostrophe. So you're the most talented person I've met. You would notice that the pronunciation of these words are different as well. Let's have a look at the pronunciation of you are and I have. So you are becomes you and I have becomes I. See, some regional implementations would be there. There may be different regional versions. So we are going with a bit of British English, because in British English, the the R sound will not be there. We will have yo. But if it were American version, you will hear you are, you are the most talented person I've met. Okay, let's look at another example of the contractions. She will think he has gone completely berserk. Can you guess a couple of contractions over here? We can link or contract will with she and has with he. So I can say this sentence by using couple of contractions as she'll think he's gone completely berserk. She'll think he's gone completely berserk. I do not have to overtly go fast, but the speed does varies the pronunciation of the contractions. See, the benefits of contraction over here, I would not necessarily have to speak the whole model or auxiliary verb as is. So she will becomes she'll, and he has become he's. See, it's pretty effortless, though it's not a long call to say she will as is and he has. But in the overall scheme of things, when you use these contractions, the length of the sentence which you have to speak or the sounds which you have to utter while speaking a sentence gets reduced, and you can focus more on more significant words such as verbs, adjectives, nouns, other than the models and auxiliaries. See, models and auxiliaries are really regulation things. They exist in almost every single sentence. So you do not have to overtly lay emphasis on them, because we are able to convey these through our sounds, which we are going to talk about. That takes us to our next topic in this presentation. That is how we pronounce contractions. All right. We saw that we can use it in a particular way, but how do we pronounce them? There are a few rules which are really helpful in learning the pronunciation of the contractions. Okay. Let's see this pronunciation once again for this sentence. She will, the pronunciation is she'll. You can see elongated vowel sound, she'll. And he's, he and is becomes he's. It's not his, it's he's. Okay. So what are the common contractions? See, as we saw earlier on, a contraction is nothing but a combination of a proverb along with a model or an auxiliary verb. So the common candidates for contraction you can see are listed here as am, are, is, has, will, had, would, have. You would notice that is and has have the same contraction. They are denoted by the same contraction, apostrophe s. It's written similar way. So as had and would. Right? So wherever you encounter these apostrophes, after that, this part of model or auxiliary verb, you'll get to know that a contraction is in use. Okay, so let's have a look. See, most of these contractions could be spoken or pronounced with a single rule. However, some of them could have different pronunciation depending on the sounds before them. And some of them have the sound dependence on sounds after them as well. But before that, let's do a quick refresher and just cope up. What are vowels and what are consonants? See, whatever we are going to talk about right now related with pronouncing contractions, it's all about sounds. It's not about spellings. Okay, it's all to do with the speaking. So the vowel sound we all know are A, E, I, O, U, and all other sounds are consonant. So just bear into mind the pronunciation of some contraction are dependent on the words or the sounds ending just before them. Okay, so in this scenario, we would look at the pronunciation of had, would, and have. Okay, so we'll look at a few examples and some rules which govern the pronunciation of these words. Okay. However, there's an analogy and there's a exception that we can have pronunciation of some contraction fixed, like will and am. Will is always pronounced as O, and am is pronounced as Okay, so whenever you encountered these contractions, will, it's O, am, it's So we just noticed that in the example, she will, she'll, I am. Okay, going back to the pronouncing two contractions. So let's take up would and had. Okay, would or had have the same contraction that is written by apostrophe D. So how do we pronounce it? See, if this contraction is preceded, had or would is preceded by a consonant sound, we pronounce it as ud. For example, it and would, it would be pronounced as itted. It would, itted. Peter had, Peter, or Peter would, Petered. So it's a schwa sound following a da sound. This is how pronunciation of had or would is done if it is followed by a consonant sound. In these scenarios, the examples we saw, it ends in a consonant sound, and so as Peter. So this rule will dictate the pronunciation of contractions with had and would. Now let's look at the scenario where had and would are preceded by a vowel sound, right? So example, they had, the pronunciation becomes they'd, or I had, I'd. So we do not have a schwa sound. Simply, if this had or would are followed by a vowel sound, we just have to pronounce them with a d. So they'd, I'd. Let's make a sentence out of it. She would rather have tea than coffee in the afternoon. Okay, so I'm having a vowel sound followed by would. So it becomes she'd rather have tea than coffee in the afternoon. All right. Let's look at another contraction using have. Okay, so it is written as apostrophe VE. Wherever you encounter have, you will have this apostrophe VE written there. So that should connote that it's a contraction using have. So a similar rule exists for have. If have is followed by a consonant sound, it becomes a schwa sound and v. So it is spoken as oh. Okay. So for example, if I have could as a model and it is followed by a have, so could have is pronounced as could have. Might have will be pronounced as might have. Could have, might have. Let's make a sentence out of it, shouldn't we? Let's say if my friend John was invited to a party, but he couldn't make it. So one of his friends are telling me, if you could have joined us, we might have enjoyed a lot more. If you could have joined us, you might have enjoyed a lot more. See? So if I don't use contractions, the length of the sentence increases and my fluency is a bit constricted. If you could have come, we might have enjoyed a lot more. So we just say these contractions effortlessly. We say these, we do keep the semblance of them, but we contract them. Okay, now let's look at the implementation of have. How have is pronounced after it is followed by a vowel sound. Okay, so remind you, vowel sounds are A, E, I, O, U. Following a vowel sound, have, contraction of have will be pronounced as V sound. I have becomes I. They have will be pronounced as they. I've got 2 pens. They've been there very early. Okay, so be careful about using them. Practicing them a lot will really help in your fluency. Well, this takes us to negative contractions. These are formed with the auxiliary verb followed by an and apostrophe t, ant. So they are much simpler as compared to positive contractions, and I think they are followed by people generally world over, both by native speakers and non-native speakers. So let's look at a few of the negative contractions over here. See, the first one, which we are going to see over here, is a little bit odd one out because will not is pronounced as won't. It's not willn't. However, the pronunciation of other negative contractions are pretty straightforward. Would not is pronounced as wouldn't. Do not as don't. Is not, isn't, and have not, haven't. Okay, let's look at a couple of examples. I think you will be raring to go with them because I believe you relate with them really well already. Okay, he does not understand why they didn't pass the test. So I've already used one of the negative contractions over here, didn't. But there's one more we can use, that is does not. See, the pronunciation of does not comes out as doesn't. So the way we'll say this sentence is, he doesn't understand why they didn't pass the test. Let's look at the pronunciation. He doesn't understand why they didn't pass the test. So does not become doesn't, and if it were did not, it would become didn't. All right, let's look at another example of a negative contraction. The employees are not happy that the company has not told them about the restructuring. So can you spot a couple of negative contractions here? Yes, I think that a couple of negative contractions which we can find here are not and has not. So the contraction of are not is pronounced as aren't and has not as hasn't. So let's have a look at it. The employees aren't happy that the company hasn't told them anything about the restructure. Okay, the employees aren't happy that the company hasn't told them about the restructure. See, notice that the aren't becomes an elongated vowel sound followed by ant, and hasn't. Okay, just keep an eye on the pronunciation of it, which is mentioned with the forward slashes. All right. So these are the negative contractions. See, negative contractions are also used as tagged questions. That's more of it in our regular course. Okay. So for example, if I may have to say, I'm talking to my friend, and after exchanging pleasantries in the morning, I tell him, it's a beautiful weather, isn't it? You've been to Delhi, aren't you? Okay. So these are tagged questions, and we use negative contractions for tagged questions as well. So for your information, tagged questions do not necessarily need answers. It's a more of a saying something which is obvious, and you just need other person to nod and probably agree with it. Okay, so that takes us to some broader rules when to use contraction and specifically when not to use the contractions. See, feel free to use contractions in your day-to-day English speaking, especially when you are dealing with people in semi-formal environment. Talk when you're talking to your colleagues in your office, when you're talking to your other students in your college or school. Feel free to use them. This is part of natural spoken English. So don't hesitate in using them in day-to-day life. However, with a keyword, avoid using very informal contractions when you are into a formal setting. Suppose if you're going to address a CEO of a company or a very senior management, probably reduce its usage to very simple and very common contractions. Okay, so avoid unconventional form contractions in the formal speaking. Specifically, avoid using slang like wanna, gonna. People may be aligned to using wanna go, gonna be there. So avoid using them in formal speaking. And also, when you're writing formally, such as essays, avoid using contractions there as well. For example, this sometimes generates ambiguity. For example, I and the, I had, I and the song, I would. Whether the reader should read it as I would or I had. Okay, so there's ambiguous things involved. However, when you are saying these sentences, you are being more expressive. So your sound convey those things, whether it's had or would. But mind you, you're not there to tell your listener or your reader specifically that what it would mean. So just be careful while writing them there. And then when you want to emphasize on certain facts, do not use contractions. For example, you wanted to emphasize on someone like Peter, you're talking about Peter, that he is the best student in the class. Then say that he is the best student in the class. Do not say he is the best student in the class. That will be entirely wrong. Or you'll use he is, not he's. And also, do not use contractions at the end of the sentence or clause. He is the best student in the class. So let's make it a question. Is he the best student in the class? Is Peter the best student in the class? So I'm asking, is he the best student in the class? The answer should be yes, he is, and not yes, he's. So be mindful of using contractions and positive contractions at the end of the clause. However, you may use negative contractions at the end of the clause, right? So, for example, if my sentence says, is he the best student in the class? And if the answer is negative, I can say, No, he isn't. So it's pretty fine to use negative contractions at the end of the clause, right? So that's about usage of contractions in formal and informal speaking. So it's an initiative. We have covered a handful of contractions and the scenarios in which they are used and the way they are pronounced. However, these are not the definitive list of contractions. We can have them used a lot in other scenarios. Okay, so going by this, for detailed information about contractions, you may want to join my class at UrbanPro.com. I have taught in excess of 50 students specifically at UrbanPro. So my students are really providing you a word of mouth. If you really like the narrative or the way I have expressed myself, and you are able to relate to what I'm trying to explain, please go ahead and book a demo for me. Look for my profile at urbanpro.com and find out more about me. You can message me from there and also book a free demo. Looking forward to see you soon. Thank you.